Hey guys, Dim Gaming here, and as the title of this video suggests, this is my Resident Evil 2 retrospect / review. Now what that means is basically I'm going to go over what I liked and disliked about the game, and then I'm going to go over the following in this order. My initial thoughts of the game, so that would be on my first ever playthrough, which my first playthrough was Claire. I made it a little bit different because everyone chooses Leon. Then I'm going to go over the characters, so the main cast and the supporting cast. Then we're going to go over gameplay and the gameplay mechanics and what I like and dislike about that. Because this game isn't perfect, it's almost perfect, but there's a few things that I didn't like. Then we're going to go over the storyline itself, and then we're going to go into replayability and a few little topics like that. So replayability such as being able to run through the game like 6 times in a row and not getting bored, and all the bonus modes and DLC. But without further ado, let's get into this.
Resident Evil 2 Retrospect.
So my initial thoughts on Resident Evil 2 Remake are as follows. So the first time I picked up the controller, I played as Claire, like I stated earlier. Most people would play as Leon, but I wanted to keep it canon, which was Claire A and Leon B, so that's what I did. All I can say from when I clicked start and we got to the gas station, I was just filled with utter nostalgia, and I was in awe of the graphics as well. Technically, it was nothing new. The gas station location was in the original Resident Evil 2, but it was just in a cutscene where the trucker unfortunately gets bitten and he runs out from. So it was really nice to actually start the Resident Evil 2 storyline there. And obviously when you get into it, the initial drama happens and I was just gobsmacked. The zombie didn't go down easily as well, which was rather interesting. I had played the one-shot demo a few times, so I was a little bit aware of the zombies' physics and how difficult they could be taken down. But I digress, because I could talk about that scene for ages, because it was amazing. But I moved on, and then after watching the cutscenes and actually getting into Raccoon City, I did feel it was a little bit short getting up to the RPD, but that I was fine with that, because the scenery that you got to run through was breathtaking. But I think the point I'm trying to get at is that visually this game is amazing. It's very photorealistic, and for that reason it makes you feel like you're playing a zombie horror film, say like you're stuck in the middle of Dawn of the Dead for example, but with less cheese. Buckle up your seats people, because here's my first gripe. No, I am joking, kind of, but let's talk about the cast. So Resident Evil 2 is very famous for its cast of characters, supporting and main characters. Obviously you have Leon and Claire, the two protagonists of the game. Now I was very happy to see them looking as familiar as they did in the original game. Now what I mean is, as you can see, Leon's outfit hasn't really changed too much, it's just been modified to make more sense. And Claire's outfit again was to make more sense, because to be honest, what biker wears booty shorts? There's some serious chafing going on. But again, I digress. Who wants to talk about booty shorts in a video game, really? But one thing I did really enjoy about Leon and Claire is how lifelike they felt. They did feel like real people. Now what I mean is some of their responses, for example, Claire's responses are more typical to a 19-year-old girl than in the original, but voice acting wasn't as prevalent in 1998 as it is now. And the same with Leon. Leon really does feel like a rookie cop, like it is his first proper day on the job. I do honestly feel like the voice acting did help give these two already iconic and depthy characters more depth. So bravo to Capcom for that one. It probably was a little bit hard at first to try and get more depth for these characters that have been around for, over 20 years. So again, well done Capcom for that. That is one of my highest bits of praise, is the voice acting. It makes this game. Now bear in mind that is just my personal opinion. You may not like the voice acting, but I did. Now let's move on to some of the support cast, and now we're going to start off with Marvin, the ill-fated cop who helps you at the start. Now I played, like I said earlier, as Claire first, so I got to see Claire's dialogue with him. And I have played through the game about 7 or 8 times at this point of this review, and I personally have to say I do enjoy Claire's interaction with Marvin rather a lot more, because it kind of shows a bit more of a caring side to Marvin rather than the "I'm your lieutenant, you'll listen to me." But I digress. Now, Marvin was one of my favourite characters in the original. Unfortunately, we only got to see him for such a short amount of time, and his fate annoyingly is the same as in the original game, where we have to put him down. But I feel like they did give him a little bit more depth because he had more lines. So that goes back to what I said earlier. The dialogue in the game is fantastic, and even just more dialogue can give the characters depth. But he was definitely one of my favourite characters in the original and again in the remake. Now I'm going to touch on the other two playable characters, and that's in the form of Ada Wong and Sherry Birkin. Now, originally, their parts of the game in the original game weren't my favourite because it was very much a copy and paste. If you were playing as Leon, you had Ada's part in the factory, and if you were playing with Sherry, you basically had the same part. Now, one thing I did really like was they made their little bits of the story more unique. However, Sherry's was fun because you're a little girl, so you don't have any guns and you can't fight back against Chief Irons, so that feeling of utter helplessness was there. However, Ada's did feel very tedious, and it's definitely not one that I enjoy playing through. Now I'm going to finally just quickly touch on Robert Kendo, Ben, Annette Birkin and Chief Irons, and I will start off with the latter of the two. Now, with Chief Irons, they have done a really good job keeping his creepy essence alive. Now, what I mean is, anyone that's played Resident Evil 2, the original, will know Chief Irons is a bit of a creepy bastard, and I like the fact that they've kept that essence alive with him, and he continues to be a creepy bastard up until his untimely and oddly satisfying death at the hands of William Birkin and one of the G-Spawns. And now moving on to Annette. Now, Annette in the original, to me, was a pretty annoying character with no redeemable features. I was kind of happy when her character again met her demise, but Capcom did a really good job of making, especially in Claire's campaign, making you really feel for Annette, and they showed a lot more of her maternal side, which was really good to see that she's not just a heartless scientist that has no time for her daughter, that she is quite conflicted and she's stuck on the moral compass of saving millions or saving her daughter. Now that probably was one of the best bits of character development in Resident Evil 2. So that, well done Capcom for that one. You made a character that probably not a lot of people liked into a character that when she did die I did feel a little bit sad. Now the final two is Ben and Robert Kendo, and one of them is a gripe, and I'm going to start off with the gripe, and that's actually about the ill-fated reporter, Ben. Now, Ben had a bit more of a pivotal role in the original Resident Evil 2. He was actually the voiceover at the start, and his role felt like it kind of meant more, but in this iteration, all it really reminded me of, if you've seen that video on the internet of the woman smushing a melon with her thighs, that's basically Ben's head, and those thighs, it's just a grey Dolph Lundgren. That's pretty much sums up Ben's iteration in Resident Evil 2. He literally has about 5 minutes of screen time, and his character could have even been cut out. That's something I just didn't really enjoy. Now, I've been talking about the cast for quite a while in this video, but the cast, in my opinion, is one of the most important things. So let's get into Robert Kendo. Loved him in the original, but oh my god, did they make his story tragic in the remake. There's a character that I loved, and I was sad when he died in the original, but they kind of leave it open to interpretation because he takes his zombified or almost zombified daughter into a door and you hear a gunshot. Did he kill her or did he kill himself? We don't know. That's probably one of the most tragic scenes in the whole of Resident Evil 2 remake. Well done Capcom for playing with those old heartstrings. Okay, let's dive straight into gameplay. Now, obviously, gameplay is a very big part of any game. Characters can only do so much. If the gameplay sucks, it's going to be a shit game. But this is where Resident Evil shines for the most of the time. So, personally, the way I think it shines, it's difficult, and it's supposed to be. A lot of people have moaned that this game is too hard, but it's a survival horror game. And if a survival horror game is easy, what's the point in calling it survival horror? Nowadays I find it's the newer generation of gamers that generally, because newer games will tend to handhold you, I think that's what people are used to. But the old school Resident Evil players like myself, we kind of assume and we kind of just know that it's not going to hold our hand, which is always very good. Now let's talk about the basic enemies in the game, so the zombies. I call them basic, but they are not basic by any means. They are some of the most challenging enemies in the game because they're very sporadic, their movements are hard to read. You can kind of get them to do certain animations if you played the game for a little bit longer, but if it's your first playthrough, you're going to be terrified because they are very powerful. A backbite can put you on danger from fine, and that's even on standard, and that's not even hardcore. But the game does reward you for not just going for headshots as well. Obviously, it's normally around 3 to 11 shots to take out a zombie with headshots. But saying that, you can easily put 3 to 5 shots into one of the zombie's legs, it will fall over, and then it's a lot less of a challenge because it's a crawling target. But that being said as well, the zombies can be quite cheap in my opinion, grabbing you through door animations and on the ladders as well, but maybe that is part of the game, or it is just a glitch that Capcom haven't ironed out yet. That being said, the fact that the enemies are hard does make it so you have to kind of plan while running, so planning while you're on your feet I should say. Whereas in the other games, sometimes you feel like you can just run through a room full of about 6 zombies and you can just dodge them all. It's not that easy. And then if you add into the mix, say some of the Cerberus dogs and maybe a licker or two, you kind of have to think a little bit more, because with a licker, you can't run. Now, keeping to the theme of the enemies, let's talk about boss fights. And as you can see in the background, I have the Bergen G2 fight. This happens to be, in my opinion at least, the most annoying boss fight in the game, just for the fact that you're on such a limited platform, and he can be a bit of a cheap bastard as well. He seems to be able to reach you from wherever. He's not that difficult once you figure him out, but the first couple of times can be infuriating, and I can tell you from personal experience it was very infuriating with me. But again, that is just something that happens with a survival horror game. The bosses do a lot of damage, and you're normally in a tight claustrophobic space. And finally, on the boss fight scenario, I do find as well, where Leon and Claire's scenarios have their own individuality, the boss fights are a little bit copied and pasted, such as the G2 fight and the G3 fight. Personally, I feel because Claire's storyline is more towards Birkin, I do think that she should fight him G3, and Leon maybe should have had another Tyrant fight. But that's something that's in the game now. I think they can't change it at this point. It would just make the game too different to what it is. Now let's jump into some of the mechanics, such as herb combining. So the thing I did like about Resident Evil 2, which wasn't technically far from the original game, they've added to. So I like the fact that you've got your traditional combinations, such as a green-red, a triple green, and I do like the fact that if you have a blue-red, it makes you go into some kind of protection mode, which basically allows you to take a few extra hits, which can be really pivotal, and it does make having a blue-red in your inventory a little bit more useful, because I can remember in the original 1, 2 and 3, having a blue-red, you were kind of running along waiting for a green to make it useful, but they've kind of made it useful, which, fair play Capcom, that's actually a really good idea, because I tell you how many times in my first couple of playthroughs at least, it's got me through some corridors which I would have died in. Another great thing about the remake, which again isn't something new but they've added onto, is the weapon custom parts. Now originally it was just Leon, and he had pistol custom parts, shotgun custom parts, and magnum custom parts, which again was cool for back in the day, but annoyingly Claire didn't get anything, so it made her weapons feel a little bit more bland. But I do like the fact that they both get their own weapon parts, and they get multiple. I think this allows the player a little bit more freedom with how they want to customize their weapons. For example, not everyone's probably going to pick up all of the pistol parts for Leon's pistol. Personally, I normally just run the extended mag and the compensator. The stock is fun, but burst fire isn't necessary. And with Claire's grenade launcher, for example, half the time I don't even use the stock because it doesn't really make too much difference to me. And it also makes the grenade launcher still one inventory slot instead of 2. Now it would be a crime not to mention one of the most famous parts of the Resident Evil franchise, and that's the puzzles, and that's something I think that the remake captures very beautifully. Now the puzzles in this game are fantastic. They do still feel in essence of the original game, such as instead of grabbing the unicorn medal in the original, you then have to grab 3 different medallions. You have to solve all the puzzles throughout the RPD to get these 3 medallions and put it in a very similar place to the original medal. So that in itself in the original was a great puzzle, but they've expanded on it and made it even more fun. Now they have also added new puzzles in the form of the one that's on the screen. Now this annoyingly does remind me a little bit of the Resident Evil 3 water puzzle, but the similarity to that is just messing around with dials. Now this puzzle itself is actually really fun. You could almost class it as a small mini game, but it does allow you to unlock parts of the lab, so it's a really cool innovative puzzle which allows you to access places that you might not think of. So such as here you find a raccoon medal and you find another RPD pouch, so there are rewards to doing some of the little puzzles. Now one final mechanic I want to mention, which again isn't anything new, but it's not from the original Resident Evil 2, it's actually from the Resident Evil 1 remake, and that is the defense items. These are amazing. I'm really glad that Capcom added this. You are only limited to a flashbang, a hand grenade and a knife, but that gives you so many options to fight or even run. So with the flashbang you can throw a flashbang into a hallway and wait for it to go off, run past your enemies, or with a hand grenade, if you want to kill 6 enemies at once, you can. Now let's move on to the storyline part of this retrospect / review. Now, like any good survival horror game, in my opinion of course, has to have a strong storyline. Now if the storyline is weak, sometimes having good characters can't save it, but this is where Resident Evil 2 shines the most. They've taken an already established story on one of the most beloved Resident Evil games and run with it again, kept the storyline feeling the same, but it's not. Now what I mean is the pacing is different as well. So in the original Resident Evil 2, you start off outside, you then go into the gun shop at the start of the game, for example, but in Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's about halfway through the game, and it serves as a good connector to either walking past it as Claire and going to the orphanage, or going into it, meeting Kendo, and then going on to the Raccoon City sewer. I personally think that's a better touch, again because you then get to explore the Robert Kendo character more. So that is a good storyline feature. So that pacing is definitely something they've changed. However, it does still feel like the original game. Now, going back to the storyline feeling original, it does definitely feel like the original game, but with more tweaks. Now, one thing that I think has helped as well is the fact that technology, so for example the RE engine, makes characters feel more lifelike, and I think that adds to the story rather a lot, because again we're going back to 1998 where they had none of this technology. There was no facial recognition or anything like that, so you couldn't really see emotion, and I think the characters do have a lot to help tell the story. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and that's to the side characters quests. That I do think adds quite a bit to the storyline. Now it is a good thing and a bad thing. Now the bad thing I'll start with. So the bad thing is, as I said earlier, I wasn't a big fan of Ada's storyline, just because it felt a bit sluggish and it felt a bit forced. She is a cool character though, and obviously she is still pivotal to Leon's part of the storyline. I do think one thing they did do better with Ada and Leon's story, however, was at the end, around this point, just after the G3 fight, I do think the way they ended Leon and Ada's involvement in the storyline together was a lot more cinematic, and it was a lot more climactic, which was good. I did genuinely feel bad for Leon, and my emotions were running high because I'd got attached to Ada all over again, and just to see what happened to her. No spoilers, but at this point you should already know what happens, at least in the original game. Funnily enough, it's actually around this point where it happens. I think the point I'm trying to get across about the story of the Resident Evil 2 remake is it feels like it's one giant cinematic experience. Now obviously that does come with the new technology. I'm not saying that Resident Evil 2, the original, wasn't cinematic, but obviously the cutscenes were cutscenes, and you could tell they were whereas this game flows from gameplay into a storyline driven cutscene very, very easily, and that is definitely to do with the technology. Now I could talk about the storyline of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 2 Remake for 2-3 days, and I'm not even joking, but obviously then you would need to play the game, so I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is I'm going to sum it up like this. Imagine watching your favorite film, and say like you watch it every week and you still love it, you love the way it is, and then they bring out a director's cut and it has all new footage you've never seen before. Now that is what Resident Evil 2 Remake feels like to me. It feels like a director's cut of my favorite film. Now we're going to wrap the retrospective up with replay value and my final thoughts on the game. So we'll start with replay value. Now I think this game does really fantastic in the replay value department, and what I mean by replay value is I've played through the game at this point about 7 or 8 times and I genuinely aren't bored right now, mainly because there's still so much to do. So your first playthrough, you know, you're going to run through, kind of take things as they are and not really explore and look for all the like little hidden bits. So for me, on my 7th playthrough, I literally have one more Mr. Raccoon to get, so I've been hunting through doing that, I've been trying to do all the films, I've been doing things like that. So you can kind of have your run depending on what you want to do. So yeah, the first playthrough is just going to be taking it as it is, taking it all in and all the storyline, and then you kind of go, okay, cool, right, I need to get all the Mr. Raccoons, I'm going to try it maybe, you know, pistol only or things like that. So there's a lot of replay value in the actual core game. And then obviously once you've had your fill of the main storyline, you know, first and second scenarios and so on and so forth, there is still so much more to do. Obviously you get the new reimagined soundtrack, but you can also get the original soundtrack. Personally, the original soundtrack is really, really cool and it's really nostalgic, but the remade soundtrack adds to the environment and the immersion of this. I definitely recommend using the original soundtrack for a bit of fun, and then if you want to have more immersion, put the reimagined soundtrack on. I've listened to this soundtrack on its own. I know it sounds a bit sad to listen to a video game soundtrack, but I love it and it's a great soundtrack, so there is that. And then you get the minigames, of course. Now Resident Evil 2, the original, did have its fair share of minigames, such as the Fourth Survivor and the Tofu Survivor. And if you had the DualShock version, which unfortunately we didn't get in the UK, as far as I'm aware, you also got Extreme Battle Mode. So on this as well, once you complete a first and second scenario, you unlock the Fourth Survivor, which is obviously Mr. Death himself, Hunk. Once you do that, you then unlock Tofu. And then once you complete it with Tofu, you unlock 2 more pieces of Tofu. And then once you do that with them, you then unlock a further 2, so 5 in total. So loads of replay value there. They have different weapons, some don't have defense items, and one doesn't even have health, so that's quite interesting as well. And at this point, they've obviously added Ghost Survivors, which is really fun, but it's a little bit arcadey. I did find, once I've actually completed them all, the only one I haven't done at this point in time is No Way Out, which is the 4th unlockable. I found it was really fun, and it was really challenging. However, I found after I've completed it, I didn't really find myself going, yeah, cool, I'm going to try and beat my time on this. I was like, cool, it's done, move on to the next thing. But, you know, there still is so much replay value in that. Now, let's move on to my final thoughts. So, where do I start, really? I think Capcom did a fantastic job in reimagining this. So, to me, this isn't a straight remake, it's a reimagining. So the setting is familiar, the characters are familiar, but it does feel entirely different in certain aspects, if that makes any sense. What I think I'm trying to say is they've taken an old classic and made it something that itself is now going to become a classic. And anyone that knows me knows that Resident Evil 3 has always been my favourite Resident Evil, but this has overtaken it. And I didn't think I'd ever find a Resident Evil game I enjoyed as much as Resident Evil 3. So I'll kind of bullet point sum it up, and then I'll give it my rating out of 10. Storyline is fantastic. Already brilliant characters, made even better and added more depth. Also fantastic. The gameplay can be a little bit janky, but the mechanics are most of the time solid. Boss fights, a little bit annoying at times, but challenging, and that's what you want. Overall, really great survival horror experience, and I would recommend this to new players to the Resident Evil franchise and old. And that's something that I wouldn't have done with some of the others. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's the first time I've done a retrospective, so I would like your feedback on it. But before I go, my rating out of 10, I'm going to do this with every retrospective I do. I'm going to give Resident Evil 2 Remake a 9.5 out of 10. I know you're thinking, that's pretty high for your first retrospective, but I have other things planned, and it's just a great game. It really is. I don't really have that many gripes with it. I really had to struggle to pick things to talk about that I didn't like, but a 9.5 for sure. The only reason it's not a 10 is just because some of the scenarios, you know, there's a little bit of copy and paste and stuff, and I didn't think that was good enough. I did think they could have added a little bit more. However, this game still has a lot of life in it as well. I think we're going to get a lot more DLC as well. But yeah, like I said, I could talk about this for, you know, days. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to have your feedback, and let me know how I did as well, and if you would like me to change any of the format or keep it like this. So thanks for watching, guys, and check out my other videos coming up now.